there's a common myth that that playing for other artists means that you don't have creative freedom.
Yeah.
Now you have a short story about Avril Lavigne's bass player.
Oh yeah.
Do you want to talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah. This is like, I feel like the more I've been playing for other artists, you know what I mean? Like I haven't spent a lot of time in my own projects. I mean, I've been in like one band where we've played like our own original stuff. And
shout out Mountain Farewell.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Don't go look it up. There's pictures of us with funny haircuts and stuff. Yeah, but most of the time beyond that, it's been playing for other artists or at like churches and stuff, which is the similar, to be honest, it's got a really similar structure to it and vibe to it in terms of like usually playing to tracks to a click. And it's not about showing off, right? And I think that is a big one in terms of this, in terms of like, what is the role of a musician? And I think it's a bit of a big myth where it's like, oh, if you're not playing your own stuff, then you're kind of sacrificing your creativity.
Yeah.
And to a degree, I agree with that, right? Because it's like you are serving someone else's vision. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any creative fingerprint to offer, right? And I think especially for younger musicians coming up is like, there's still a lot that you can bring to the table in as a session musician. And I've found more often than not, artists do, I think at least the artists we've gotten to work with are very open to collaboration, open to ideas, and not everybody. So that's I don't know Avril Lavigne's bass player, but I was doing some research on I was running my Helix, and which is a effects unit for the guitar, a modeler. And I was just trying to look up like people who use them for patches and who like what other musicians are using them on tours and stuff, and just do a bit of research. And I saw there's a Reddit thread where I forget his name. I have to go look it up, but he played bass on one of Avril Lavigne's like recent tours in the last couple of years, and he was running a Helix for his bass. And it was just kind of like a Q&A thread.
Right.
But he pointed out on it, he was like, we recreated every patch from her songs, like to a T. Like we EQ'd them as close as we could get to the original stems. I sat down with the musical director and like, they just dialed it in exactly as the record and played the parts exactly as the record and toured with basses that would replicate that sound.
Right.
And I think that that's an example of that. It's like depending on what the artist needs, what your client needs, what their vision is, then it's like, yeah, sometimes you're going to need to do that.
Yes.
And sometimes it's very important to do that, especially when you get up to that scale. And there's nothing wrong with that. And actually there's a lot of fun sometimes in dialing things in that specifically.
Yes.
But in terms of the creative freedom element, that's not everybody. And that's not every artist for sure. And I think from our own experience, there's a lot of times when we step in and it's like, I kind of got to write a part for this section, or they didn't write it for this instrumentation, or they didn't even write it for live. Like, they weren't thinking of playing it live at the time. So they're like, how do we translate this? It's like, well, maybe we add a guitar part here, or maybe in a couple of Elio's tunes, it's like, let's add a synth part here, because then I can play something live, because there isn't really something to fill in. So in those moments are where you get to kind of bring your creative, you get
expression,
you get to show up a
bit. Individuality.
Yeah. And you get to bring yourself in that and step up to the plate and be like, all right, like, let's get some ideas out. Let's come up with some stuff. And I think as well about the value of that fingerprint. Like we talked earlier about some of John Mayer's musicians, right? It's like they bring such a unique flavor to the sound.
Yes.
Right? And you think of like a guy like Steve Jordan, you mentioned like Isaiah Sharkey too. I'm trying to think of some other, like a guy like Mateus Asado. You know what I mean? It's like he comes in and it's like sometimes they're literally hiring people because they sound like them. You know what I mean? So they've got a sound. You're like, hey, I want to add that flavor to the live set.
Oh yeah.
So there's actually a lot of value in having a fingerprint and having your own creative expression and
having your own sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve Jordan specifically is a great example of this because when Steve Jordan's playing the drums. You know when you can immediately identify that it's him that's playing.
Yeah,
Especially live. There's a lot of drummers specifically, and obviously sort of biased to that, but like Chris Dave, as a drummer is definitely like a drummer that has his signature sound and the signature way that he plays the drums, that we recognize how he plays and how he sounds right away. Like in the first like bar, we know it's Steve Jordan, we know it's Chris Dave, we know it's Aaron Sterling, we know it's it can be anybody.
Couple thoughts on this. Like, I think there's a difference between finding your sound and finding yourself, like what your authentic form of your expression is, versus I think that it's really easy in today's day and age to try to find a thing because it's easy to market.
Right.
And that's a very different thing, in terms of like, I'm going to be the guy with that haircut on TikTok.
Right.
I'm going to be the guy that does this cover, know, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just want to distinguish that I think that those are different things. Because one is to me, this is maybe a hot take. I don't know if there's a button for like the bruh, or maybe like a bruh. Yeah. This may be a hot take. Bruh. But tough. When I've heard guys talk about like finding your sound, like Corey Wong talks about this on his podcast a lot, I think. And I'm 26.
Yeah.
I haven't been playing for very long compared to many people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what my sound is like. What does Nate sound like on guitar? It's like right now it's still pretty crude. It's like a bit of Matthias Sato, a bit of John Mayer, a little bit of like I went through like an intervals metal phase. I went, it's like I'm still a bit I don't know what that word is. It hasn't consolidated. It hasn't really consolidated. It's still a little bit janky. Like, you know what I mean? It's all over the place. And I think that when it's like, I don't think people should focus too much on being like, what's my thing?
Yeah.
I think it's like go down rabbit holes and just keep doing that and like replicating and adopting sound and going deep on being like what I would do with John Mayer stuff is like, I'm trying to sound exactly like John Mayer. That's not going to be my end place. Right. But it's like by doing that, I'm incorporating the elements as I go along, like picking up pieces as I go.
Yeah.
And then do that with intervals, like Aaron Marshall, then do it with like Schofield. Take a couple and like just try to jump around and like lift things to take with you along the way. It's kind of like along your journey.
Yeah.
And then you find the more you start to express yourself and like write parts and play parts and improvise and stuff. It's like those things start to kind of come out, but then they start to kind of merge together and then you find that. And there's that. Yeah. And then I think there's another layer of it as a session musician that's being able to do the thing, whatever that thing is. So it's like, okay, I might show up to a gig and they're like, oh, I want this to be like, I don't have this right, but it's like, do the like Matthias Sato thing. Right. Yeah. And it's like sometimes there's or a jazz thing or a rock thing. And so it's like being able to know those parts. It's like, that's what sets apart the like great musicians from the like, I'm on everybody's record musician. And I look at the guys who's the drummer? Ash Sohn. It's like, I'm like, that guy.
King.
Yeah.
King.
It's like, when I look at guys like that, where I'm like, or from a guitar standpoint, like Mark Lettieri. Yeah. I'm like, he can do anything. He has his thing and his passions, but it's like he can show up to a rock gig, he can show up to a jazz gig, he can show up to a funk gig, a hip hop. It's like, and he can fit it. So there is a lot of value, I think, in doing the deep dives. Yeah. And I don't think it's necessary to get too caught up and be like, I have to find my thing, or I'm not going to be found out if I don't have a thing. And it's ultimately about the song. Yeah. It's not about impressing people. And it's like, you kind of have to check your ego at the door. And I think that's true of a lot of art forms, is like, you're serving a greater thing. And it's not about being busy. It's not about writing the coolest solo. It's about writing the right solo. It's about playing the right part for that song. And so I think that's a huge mindfulness thing as a musician, to be like listening to the other musicians you're playing with, listening to the song, and not getting too focused on you and what you're trying to do. And it takes discipline, and it's like, I'm not perfect at it either. I'm still learning what that means. But the more you do it, the more you do it and like listen back to yourself and watch recordings or something, like that didn't fit, or so that's a great way to learn.
Being aware of that too.
100%. Yeah. And I think that was something Sean Hurley, he's a session bass player, talked about on the Corey Wong podcast. I think he's talking about it there. This idea of like, I think it was them. But just, it's about the part, it's about the artist, it's about the song. And it's not about impressing people. And a lot of times simpler is better, and actually simpler is more impressive and more emotive than trying to impress people.
Yeah.
So